Hi, thank you for tuning into the Short Stacks. I'm Lisa Quintero, Young Adult Librarian.
And I'm Lizzie Jelly, Virtual Engagement Librarian.
This is a show where we talk to you about what we've been reading, listening to, or watching, and this week we are talking about crossover between the romance genre and either fantasy or sci-fi. So Lizzie, you want to get us started?
Oh my gosh, do I ever! This happens to be one of my favorite genre blends of all time. This is, quite honestly, all I've been reading in 2023. So if you need a fantasy or romance recommendation, I'm your girl. So I don't even know where to start. I mean, maybe it'd be good to kind of review basic definition of what is a romance, what is a fantasy, and how they kind of intersect with each other.
Yeah. So fantasies are often, like stories that involve either special creatures like dragons or, sometimes other fantasy creatures like werewolves or things like that. And they also sometimes are, they take place in like Lord of the Rings types realms. Yes. Lots of like adventure, friendship stories, that kind of thing. But
usually magic, right?
Yeah, often magic, not always. Or superpowers.
Oh, yes.
Or, in the last few years, there's been a lot more with superpowers.
And there's a ton of fantasy subgenres as well, right?
Yes,
this is a huge genre.
There are tons of fantasy subgenres, yes, because there's like dark fantasy, which would be like your Game of Thrones. There's like historical fantasy. There's, the retellings of fairy tales, which have been popular. Like there was one that came out of that was like a retelling of Wendy and the Lost Boys or something like that came out last year.
Oh, cool.
There's all sorts of subgenres, and sometimes they involve romance, and sometimes they don't. And sometimes it's just a little bit, and sometimes it leans pretty heavy on the romance.
And that's where we get some big crossover energy.
Yeah.
Because I know we talked about romance, I think, last season a little bit, but just as a refresher for anyone who maybe skipped that episode, romance really only has two main requirements to be a romance in the romance genre. And that it has to have a central love story that's important to the plot, and it has to have a happily ever after or a happy for now. If it has a sad ending, it cannot be a romance. So that's, for me at least, that's really helpful in deciding if something is more of a fantasy or more of a romance, because if there's any sort of unhappy ending, never mind, can't be a romance.
Unless it's a series, though. Sometimes
that's where it gets tricky. There's lots of gray area here, and I love to wallow in that gray area.
Yeah, like one series, a very popular series that came out many years ago that people, might consider romance is the True Blood series.
Yes.
And that would be both like fantasy, horror, and romance.
Exactly.
And some books end not happily and some do, but it's a whole long series.
Right, and we get all these different kind of romantic storylines, and we really, So there's lots of ways that you can, as a romance reader, there are tons of fantasies that you will like, right? And as a fantasy reader, there are tons of romances that you will like. And they cross all over the place. If you look up some of these books that we're going to talk about, even in just the library catalog, you'll see some of them live in fantasy, some of them live in romance, some of them live in general fiction. It truly just depends, because they can be many things at once.
Yes, they can. All right, so why don't you tell us about some of your favorite fantasy
my gosh.
Fantasy romance.
We could be here all day, unfortunately. But I've been really into some romantic fantasies lately. And one that I absolutely will not stop talking about, I tell it to anyone who asks me what I've been reading and what I recommend lately, is A Marvelous Light by Freya Mars. It is so good in so many ways. And I definitely think it skews more fantasy than romance. There's a lot of romantic plot elements in it, but I would put it as a fantasy at the end of the day. It's book one of the Last Binding trilogy. The first two books have come out, and it is a queer mystery magic story set in Edwardian England. So it follows Robin, who's a non-magical government employee, and he gets accidentally assigned to the magical unit to replace someone who's disappeared. And the person he's partnered up with is just this really uptight magician named Edwin. And very stereotypical, by the book, no nonsense, very anxious kind of. And Robin is this very I think of him as a college football player. He's got big golden retriever energy. He's just very boisterous, very friendly, always got a smile, has no idea what's going on, that kind of thing. And so they have to team up to kind of undo a curse and unravel this magical government conspiracy kind of. And so it's really fun to watch their energies just really bounce off of each other, because Robin is one of the ones that ends up cursed. And so Edwin's like, oh, if I don't fix this, I think he's going to die. And Robin's like, I don't care. I'm having a great time. Like, but it's so cool. And they end up falling in love along the way, of course. But it reminded me a lot of, like, if you're looking for something that's like Harry Potter, but not Harry Potter and a little more grown up, I would highly recommend this. But yeah, I recommend it to literally everybody. And the cover's so cute too. It's like purple, and it's got like the two main characters on it in orange. And it's like this, I don't know, this really pretty kind of like floral background. It's beautiful. It's just beautiful.
So what are some of the other ones that you have?
Oh, stop. I could go all day. Another one that I really, really loved that I read early on this year is called A Taste of Gold and Iron by Alexandra Rowland. And I hadn't really heard anything about this, but I saw the cover and I was like, oh, how romantic. It's like, I don't even know. If you see the cover, you'll be like, oh yeah, Lizzie would love this book. It's got two men on the cover and they're like leaning against each other. It's like a close-up and they're just like lovingly gazing at each other. It's definitely very fantasy though. It's set in this like queer normative matrilineal society that's kind of inspired by the Ottoman Empire. Which is really, it's just fascinating conceptually, because we get this universe where like homophobia isn't super a thing. But we follow Prince Katee as he's investigating this counterfeiting conspiracy, which is like a whole thing because their kingdom is like known for having like the most solid currency. And part of the magic of this universe is they can like taste metal and like know the composition. It's really fascinating. So they know counterfeit money like right away by like just like touching it, tasting it. They're like, oh, that's a fake.
Makes me think of geologists when they like lick stones.
No, literally, that's what a picture's like. They're like holding it, they're like, this one has more of this in it. And I was like, fascinating. Love that energy. But it's kind of another like Sunshine and Grump story as well, because like Prince Katee is just, he's so nice and he's so sweet and so gentle. And he gets paired up with his bodyguard named Evimer, who is just the grumpiest curmudgeon you could ever meet. Like, oh my gosh, he's not mean. He's just uptight. But like, it's so cute to watch them kind of have to work together to undo this conspiracy. And there's a lot of conversation about like the power dynamics of their relationship too. And there's so many good romance tropes. But yeah, I loved it. It's kind of long. And I did it as an audiobook, and it was quite good. I really liked the narrator and the pacing of it, so highly recommend if you're looking for a fantasy audiobook.
Cool. Yeah, one of the ones that I have is actually a YA book. It's called The Good Luck Girls, and it is both fantasy and a little bit of sci-fi and romance.
Ooh.
So it's a mix of everything.
We love a good blend.
Yeah, and it's a little dystopian too. So it is... seems like it's been, slated to be the first of a series.
Yes, we love a series.
Yeah, so it's kind of like Westworld meets The Handmaid's Tale. So it's about a bunch of adolescent girls, and they live in this like world that's modeled after like the Old West, and they work as prostitutes. They are sold into it as children, and then like they, and it's about the main character is this girl. Oh, what is it? Clementine. And Clementine, it's, as children, they're kind of maids in the house. And then once they hit their 16th birthday, they're made to work, like with the, men or whatever. And so on her first night that she's supposed to, do the thing, she kills her John. And so her and a bunch of the other girls have to dispose of his body and run away. But the fantasy element in this is that they are all marked with these tattoos on their neck that indicate that they are what's called good luck girls, so that they are returned to their owners, and they can't cover them up with anything. Like if they try to cover up with makeup or like a scarf or anything like that, it makes their skin burn, and it gets to the point where it's so uncomfortable that they can't keep it covered.
Ooh.
And so yeah, they start working their way across the country because they know about this woman. And I can't remember what she's called, but there's this lore that she's able to get rid of their tattoos, and that they could live normal lives and not be good luck girls anymore. And so yeah, the first book is kind of the journey to get to this woman, and then it kind of ends when I won't spoil the ending, but it ends when they get to their destination and find out some information that isn't exactly what they thought. But yeah, I'm excited for the next book. And yeah, It's, I guess, the only thing that made me think it like a little bit sci-fi is it's got some kind of like what's it called, the locomotive steampunky kind of stuff.
Oh, sure,
yeah. But it doesn't really lean heavily on that. It's more dystopian, more fantasy. So in YA it's interesting because I feel like there's a lot more crossover with genres in YA than there is in adult stuff. Like in adult, I feel like there's more like 2 genre crossover, where in YA sometimes it's like, let's throw everything in here.
Mashup, which I love dearly. I was like, yes, how many genres can we put in one book, please?
So what else do you have?
Oh, I feel like just by default, I have to mention the A Court of Thorns and Roses series by Sarah J. Maas, because I can't talk about romantic fantasies without mentioning it, because it is so popular and there's just constant discussion around it as well. So obviously I read the whole series because of course I did. Yeah. They're super long, but the audiobooks are really good. So again, another audiobook plug for y'all. It's always trending on TikTok. Well, it has been for the last years, it feels like. And this series is often banned in a lot of school libraries. So I wanted to read it just to kind of see what all the fuss is about. I'm like, I want to know what's going on so I can actually give honest answers. It's mostly worth the hype, I would say. It's very like human girl Farah is kind of captured and brought into this like dangerous and magical land of the fairies by Tamlin, who's a high lord. Romances bloom, there's a curse to be broken, and Farah faces just danger after danger. So it's a lot of like kind of girl power energy where she saves herself and everyone else many, many times. So if you love those kind of storylines, it's good for that. And I don't know. This is a tough one in a lot of ways because it's like a young adult and new adult series at the same time. And I know there's tons of discussion about whether it should live as an adult series or as a young adult series. And Lisa, you might have a little more insight on this too, because I think it really varies by library where you're going to find this one.
We have it divided. We have a lot of the early books are in young adult, and then the ones that have come out as adult under the publisher's word, we've put those in adult. So because it's one of those series where it seems like the characters grow over time or whatever.
And they do.
So
they do.
So sometimes that happens and you end up like dividing the series. So.
Absolutely. Which I just find it also interesting. Like as a librarian, I'm really into this stuff, of course. But I think when we first meet Farah, she's maybe 18 or 19. Okay. So very like, she's obviously a teenager. And then we follow her for a couple of years. So like, as readers, you get to kind of see her grow. And so you move from like those teenage concerns to more adult concerns, right? Of more like kind of political elements come into it and more intense relationship elements come into it as well. But I would recommend it if you like romantic fantasy. I read the whole series. Honestly, the 4th book was my least favorite, which I think is the one that gets banned the most. But it's not my least favorite for the reasons that they ban it. I just found Nesta to be kind of annoying, to be honest. She was going through it for like 900 pages. And I was like, can a girl get a break? Like, come on, Sarah J. Maas, please, just throw her a bone. She's so depressed. Like, help her out. But if you can make it through it, I'm hopeful for a next book in the series because I want to know what happens with some of the other characters.
Also, I just realized that when I was talking about Good Luck Girls, I did not mention the romance elements. There are romance elements to it.
I just assumed.
I focus on like the fan, that's the thing is I like a lot of the books that are the crossover, and I do like some romance and stuff, but I don't seek out like romance in particular, and so like I tend to focus on the genre that I'm looking for, but then it has other stuff in it. I'm like, oh, this works for me. But
I think that's why we work so well because I'm only focused on the romance elements, unfortunately.
But yeah, so in the Good Luck Girls, the romance elements are one, they meet a guy along the way who helps them out. And one of the girls falls in love with him, and, they get into some trouble with him, and there's some issues that go on there. And then also, two of the girls that are running away are in a romantic relationship with each other. So
we get multiple romance storylines. I love that, too. I'm a big fan of, like, romantic fantasy series where each book we kind of get, like, a new kind of pairing or, like, a new romantic plot line. Love that.
Yeah. Cool. So what else do you have?
Oh, I have too many, to be honest. What else? Okay, I should mention a couple other of my absolute favorites of all time. One that I also cannot stop talking about, and I love it so much I put it on the 2022 staff favorites list, is The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy by Megan Bannon. Fun fact, she's a former public librarian. So we love that. But it's so good, and it's so heartbreaking. Like, if you want a romance that's going to hurt you before it heals you, I highly recommend this one, because I love an emotional roller coaster. But it's a pen pal focused enemies to lovers romance, but it's set in this like complete fantasy world where there's like they call them drudges, but they're like zombies. And so it's like, if you die and you don't like make it to the Undertaker fast enough, you're reanimated as like this really dangerous kind of creature in this borderlands surrounding their like nation, kingdom, whatever, and it's called Tanria. And so there's like all kinds of lore about why that is, why that happened, and there's like marshals, which one of our main characters named Hart is a marshal, who like go out and kind of like try to hunt the drudges, try to collect them to bring them back to the Undertaker so they can go through their like end of life process, basically. And then we meet Mercy, who is an Undertaker. She is overworked, underpaid, covering up for her brother, who is supposed to be the Undertaker, but went off to Undertaker school and said, no, I want to study like Greek mythology. And she's like, bro, what am I supposed to do here? So she's covering for him and her father, whose health is failing. And they're both just so overworked, stressed, and lonely. So Hart, while he's out, zombie hunting in the wilderness, very cowboy energy, like around the fire, he writes an anonymous letter to a friend. And they have this like really funny magical postal system where it's like these like rabbits and lizards and owls who deliver the mail, but they're very sassy about it because they're like demigods. And so he has like a rabbit who is his personal like male person who just bullies him the whole time. So he comes to get it and he's like, I'll get this where it's supposed to go. And it ends up getting to Mercy. And Hart and Mercy, for perspective, hate each other. Every time Hart stops by her like funeral home, she is pissed off. She's like, I don't want to deal with your nonsense. Why are you bringing me this stuff? I'm tired. I can't do it. And Hart's like, why is she so mean to me? She's nice to everybody else. But they end up really falling for each other and understanding each other through their letters back and forth. But they have no idea. They're writing to each other until they plan a little meetup, and Hart walks into the cafe, sees Mercy at the table with her little letters, and says, absolutely not, I'm not doing it. It cannot be her. So she thinks that the person stood her up, super upset, all of that. And we get a really fun family for her as well. So lots of really good side characters in this one. But they do end up meeting and actually falling in love, and they have to like save the world together. I can't tell you the twist, but I sobbed while reading this before I made it to the actual resolution, because I was just like, oh, it hurt me so deep, but in such a good way. And the cover is really fun on this one, too. It's like skeleton hands forming a little heart. And then it has, if you've seen the cover, you know the one. It's like bright teal. And then it has like a gravestone in the middle with like Mercy on one side with a shovel and Hart with like his cowboy hat on the other side. And they're both like really tall as well, which is always so funny. Hart's meant to be like 7 feet tall. Oh, wow. She's like a 6 foot tall woman. So they just like tower above the rest of the town, which is so funny. But yeah. That's another one of my favorites. And it's very, I don't know. I think you could fight me on it about whether it should live in romance or fantasy. I truly think there's an argument both ways. But as a romance lover and reader, I see it as a romance.
Yeah, like you said, sometimes it's hard to determine which it is.
It really is. Because I think that Venn diagram is almost a circle sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes it is. Like I can think of a series where like... the Gail Carriger Parasol Protectorate series. Like, I feel like that Venn diagram is pretty much a circle, because I feel like it's very much a romance, but it's also very much a, like, intrigue fantasy series about hunting monsters.
Yes. And it's like, you can't separate that out. Like, sometimes, especially with some paranormal romances, like, this is another one of the ways I use to decide where I think things would make the most sense to live, is like, can I take the magic out of this and it would still make sense? And sometimes I can, especially with some paranormal romances. Like, okay, she could just be like, weird and not a vampire, and the story would still make sense. Which is a lot of like the contemporary like rom-com paranormal romances that are popular right now. But sometimes, like, I would argue with, well, I guess Undertaking of Hart and Mercy is a good example. I can't separate those elements, and they have to live together for the story to make any sense. So it's both, baby. Yeah.
So that brings me to my next one. My next one's actually a romance and sci-fi mix. And so sci-fi often either involves like time travel or, actual science, potential futures, different pasts, dystopias, a bunch of different things. Again, just like fantasy, it has a lot of subgenres. And so this one is also a young adult title, and it is called See You Yesterday by Rachel Lynn Solomon. And it involves a little bit of time travel and is kind of like Groundhog's Day. So it is about this girl named Barrett Bloom, and she is hoping to have a fresh start at college after having like a terrible senior year. And when she gets to college, everything goes wrong. Her roommate is actually her nemesis from high school.
Oh, classic.
She goes to her physics class and is completely humiliated by this like know-it-all. She botches her interview for the college newspaper, and then she goes to a party that night where she accidentally sets a frat on fire.
Oh, poor dear.
And she panics and she flees and she falls asleep in the common room because she gets locked out of her dorm room. And when she wakes up the next morning, she's in her bed, and it is the same day all over again, and she gets to do it all over again. And after the course of doing this a few times, she discovers that the guy who humiliated her in physics class is actually also experiencing the same thing, and he's been trapped for months.
That's why he knows everything. Oh my gosh, it all comes together.
Yep, and so they, start working together. His mom is actually the physics professor, so he has some knowledge of physics, and his dad's also a professor, and so together they start working on trying to figure out what it is that's happening and why they're repeating this day and if they can ever break out of it. And of course, at first they start out as kind of enemies because he was so rude to her, but they turn into, lovers, and it is very cute. Barrett is one thing that plays a part too is she's Jewish and her mom is queer. Her mom is like in a relationship with another woman, and one of the things involved is like her mom's fiance is planning on proposing to her, and Barrett wants that to happen, and she wants to see the proposal, but it can't happen because she's stuck on this day, and it's happening over and over again. And she discovers too that Miles is half Jewish, and so they kind of go over their Jewish heritage a little bit, and they learn all sorts of things about each other, and it was cute. I liked it a lot. So.
I love that. I love romances specifically where our two kind of lovers, they have to like solve a thing together, and they're the only ones who can solve it, and they like, it's like classic enemies to lovers thing. It's like, fine, well, I have to work with you even though I hate it. Yeah. And they fall in love. So good. Yeah. And Miles is half Asian and half Jewish, and so he's got, he like shares some of his Asian culture with her that she's like not familiar with, and he learns more about Judaism from her because he does, his family's not as practicing or whatever. Of course she repeats the same mistakes a couple times, and I feel like you have to just test it out, right?
Yeah.
I would anyway.
And it's funny because some days she like tries to like at the beginning she's dressed all nice because it's her first day of school, and like towards like the middle of the book she's just like showing up in her pajamas and not doing her hair. She's just like, I don't care, like whatever, they of course try to like kill themselves to see what would happen.
Yeah, they're just, you gotta try all your angles to break out of that, like.
Yep.
Oh man, I gotta read that one. That sounds so good, actually.
Yeah. So See You Yesterday, and I listened to that on audio, but it's available here at the library as a book too. Both of the ones that I listened to on audio. I think both of them were on Hoopla.
I do love a good audiobook lately. I think most of these that I've mentioned, I have done the audiobook version of. Except I know I read the physical book for Undertaking of Heart and Mercy because the cover is so beautiful. But all the rest of them, I've gotten on either Libby or Hoopla, which is awesome.
Yeah. You got any others?
Oh, I have too many. I have some that I'll just quickly mention. Like, if you are someone who likes fantasy romances or romantic fantasies, what have you, I have a couple authors and series that I would recommend starting with. A big one is, of course, Jennifer Armentrout. Her From Blood and Ash series is very popular among this kind of genre blend. I would also recommend Katee Roberts' Dark Olympus series, especially if you love like retold myths and legends. It's retold Greek mythology that follows like a different kind of romantic relationship in each book.
That was the graphic novel series, right?
This one is, so that's Lore Olympus. Also recommend.
Okay.
There's a lot of like retold Greek myths coming out lately as romances. It's a big trend. But I would recommend that one. The first one's Neon Gods, and then Radiant Sin just dropped like last week, and that's the 4th in the series. I just finished it last night. It's good, but I think book 3 is still my favorite, which is Wicked Beauty. Their covers are so good too. Like, just beautiful. What else? Oh, if you are into like shapeshifters, I would recommend Susanna Allen's Shapeshifters of the Beaumont series. It's hilarious. It's like a Regency romance, but all of the Dukes' main love interests, of course, are some sort of shifter.
Ooh.
Like there's werewolves, there's a bear shifter, there's a lion shifter, and the Prince Regent makes an appearance as like king of the shapeshifters as well. They're so funny. They've got some little antics in there. Okay, so great question. For those of you who read this series, I want to talk about this because I want to guess together because it's like a big secret what he is. But he's like meant to be super powerful, and so they
It'll
keep
be funny
mentioning
if he's
him.
like a mouse or something.
No, because there's like a turtle shifter that shows up in it. There is a mouse. She's very nice, and there's a dove shifter. But they're always like, oh, Georgie, he's so scary. And what is he? I need to know. And I'm really hoping that book 4 focuses on him. I don't think it will, but, I'm putting that into the universe. Susanna Allen, when book 4 comes out, I want to know what Georgie is.
Yeah.
But highly recommend if you're into shifter romances. Another one that I just started, which is kind of an older series, is the Black Dagger Brotherhood series by J.R. Ward. I think it came out in like the early 2000s, and it's got a lot of like vampires, demons, and like vampire hunters. Big kind of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer energy, actually. I just started book 1 quite literally last night, but that's the vibes I'm getting. I think the first one came out in 2005, and there's like over 20 books in the series. Okay. So if you want a long-standing one, I would recommend starting there. And I think by the end, like the next one that's coming out, I think is called Lassiter. And I know that one is like about fallen angels, so it's got a lot going on from what I can tell. And then, I could talk about Nora Roberts' Dragonheart Legacy series. It's more fantasy than romance, but it's cute, it's sweet. If you like kind of like Irish style fantasies, where like someone, my long lost dad is in Ireland, I'm going to go learn about my heritage and end up in like this magical fae world where I have to save a kingdom. Definitely recommend. What else is on here? Oh, the one that I have to mention, solely because I love India Holton as an author, and she's such a nice person, is her Dangerous Damsels series. It's like this really cute, like historical Victorian era fantasy romance series. And it's like the Princess Bride in a book. And it's so cute. And it's all about like, Regency romances are really focused on like social constraints and the mannerisms and like what's proper and whatnot as part of the romance. So that shows up in this, but they're like pirates and thieves and witches. And so like it's fine for them to like, steal a house because they fly houses instead of ships, which is another just bonkers aspect of this book. And that's fine, right? But they can't like be in a room alone together because, that's improper. But I can steal your house and fly away. That's fine. That's totally fine. But no, my chaperone has to accompany me. And I think there's 2 books currently out. The first one is The Wisteria Society of Lady Scoundrels. And then there's a third one coming out later this spring. And I'm really looking forward to it because they're just, I don't know, they're so lighthearted and they're very light on the spice as well. So if you want like a real kind of gentle romance, it's good for that as well.
Cool. Very good. Anything else?
Oh, Lisa, I could talk about this all day.
Did you have any sci-fi ones?
I do. Actually, I do. I just finished a novella, and it's kind of like more urban fantasy, I think. But it's called Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. And it's almost like more of a mystery, romance, urban fantasy combo. It's really short, but it's set in like 1930s Chicago. And it follows a lesbian couple as they try to like catch the White City vampire. And it's got angels in it. It's got like demons in it. And it's like, I don't know. It's really good. It's really like, I don't know. If you love like film noir and that kind of stuff, it's got a lot of that energy where she's like, she's got her suspenders on and she's a detective and she's going to solve the mystery.
So is the vampire like the serial killer from the...
Yes.
Like from The Devil in the White City book by Eric Larson?
It is. So it's like, it's fascinating in a lot of ways and it's a really quick read. So I highly recommend it if you don't have a lot of time or you don't want to like get involved in a 900-page book, because I think that's one of my issues with this particular genre blend is a lot of them are massive, just massive. Like the audiobooks are like, they're upwards of 40 hours, which is a big commitment. So if you just want a little taste, Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk is well worth it. And it's got a really great cover too. And then the other sci-fi one that I feel like I have to mention because I think half of the library staff is reading this book right now. And I mentioned it before because I read the whole series over the summer, is Ice Planet Barbarians. Definitely sci-fi because we're in space. There's aliens. It's a whole thing. And they're quick reads. They're very short. And the audiobooks are all on Hoopla, and there are physical books in the collection now. I think the first 4 or 5 are available as physical books now. But they're, if you're into alien abduction, setting up on a new planet, any sort of
space opera-y kind of stuff.
It's very space opera-y, and there's a lot of, each book focuses on a new kind of pairing, and there's some adventure in it. They do a lot of exploring of the planet. There's hunting in it, and there's a lot of, I don't know how to describe it without spoiling it, but they're the girls are pretty cool. They're pretty tough, and they do a lot of, they get their revenge on their captors. I think book 3 and 4 is where we really see that. So if you read book 1 and you're interested, and that's the other thing about this series. And everyone that I've talked to who has read Ice Planet Barbarians has said that this has happened to them as well. You pick up the first one, you blink, suddenly you've read 11 of them. You get sucked in. They are, I don't know what's in them. I don't know what Ruby Dixon did in these books, but they are, I don't know. It's you just can't stop once you start. It's like potato chips or
all right, I might have to check one out. I've heard everybody talking about them.
With a grain of salt. No, listen, it's so embarrassing. Because I wouldn't stop talking about it because it was a huge thing on TikTok, and I think the Milwaukee Public Library's book club read it at one point as well. And so now everyone who picks it up is Lizzie, guess what I'm reading? And I'm oh, it's the Big Blue Alien book, isn't it? But if you're a romance reader and you really want a sci-fi romance that's heavy on the spice, this is definitely for you.
Okay.
And I will happily recommend my favorites of the series to you. And there is a spin-off series as well by Ruby Dixon called Ice Home. And I think all of those are on Hoopla as well.
Okay.
And they're really short. I think some of the books are only about 5 hours, the audiobooks. So they're quick reads. There's so much that goes on. But I could talk about it all day. So if you read one and you need someone to decompress with, come find me. I'm here.
All right. Well, unless you have anything else to add.
I think those are all of my big ones. I mentioned, the only author I didn't mention, if you are also into retold myths and legends, is Scarlett St. Clair. She does a lot of retold myths and legends as these really kind of dark fantasy romances, lots of vampires. She has a retold Greek myths one as well that follows Hades and Persephone. I think that one is A Touch of Darkness is the first one. Those of you on TikTok are going to know that title. It was all over. And the other series is the Adrian and Isolde series. The first one is King of Battle and Blood. And I read it. I liked it. Book 2 got a little too wild for me. It just I don't know. Book 1 made a lot of sense. We got vampires. We got a conqueror. It's a retelling of the Tristan and Isolde myth. Yeah. So if you know that, you kind of know the basic storyline. And then book 2, suddenly we get an explosion of other legendary mythical creatures and storylines.
Went off the rails a little bit.
It did. It took a hard left. But the cover's really beautiful. So, of course, it sucked me in. But, book 2 lost me a little bit. But book 1 is really, really good.
Okay, cool. But you can find all these books listed on our podcast's book lists on the website. As always, if you have any questions or comments for your host, you can email us at shortstacks@gmail.com. And if you are looking for any fun events to do at the library, you can always check out our website, shorelibrary.org, and our events calendar there. As always, if you have any questions or comments for your host, you can email us at shortstacks@gmail.com. You can find us on Podbean, Spotify, or iTunes. Until next time, thanks for listening, and be well. The Shore Stacks is produced by Lisa Quintero and Lizzie Jelly for the Shore Public Library. Music for the show is by Kevin MacLeod. The song is called Ice Flow and can be found on incompetech.com.